Lockheed Martin calls the F-35 Lightning II the world's most advanced multi-role fighter. It's a single-seat, single-engine jet. The F-35 is expected to arrive at Truex in 2023.
The Air Force's decision to deploy the F-35 fighter jets to Truex Field was controversial as thousands of Madison residents registered their opposition. Of the more than 6,000 comments submitted on the draft environmental impact statement for 5 potential sites, 89% of those were submitted regarding Truex.
We could be spending that on healthcare, education, infrastructure, things that we really need as people and as a country.
The EIS stated that Truex Field would experience the greatest environmental impacts of all sites, even though the statement did not even consider noise and safety impacts on the surrounding urban area and the 60,000 people living within 3 miles of the base.
I don't take for granted a lot of the privileges that I have as a Mexican woman and living here in Madison, and as a woman being able to walk in my neighborhood, and feeling safe. You start building with a lot of hope. And when I learned all this, I had the impression, oh my God, I have to live again. So I'm worried. I'm worried if I have to move again. I'm worried if I have to find another place where I can find safety, especially for me and my daughter. And also that everything that I've worked so far is just going to be crumbling.
When we hear loud sounds, the brain has the ability to turn on the facial nerve that dampens the ossicles or the bones of the middle ear. So it tampons down sound, but the problem with impulse sound is that there's not time to do that. I think that the F-16s are going to be at peak about 94 decibels, the F-35s at about 115. The ear will perceive the difference between the F-16s and the F-35s at about 4 times louder. Loud noises, like airplanes, particularly the F-35s, the F-16s, have a bigger impact on kids because, partly because they're in a different stage of development than an adult is.
Is that a good blondie?
Their ability to learn language, for instance, is hugely expansive from the time kids are born until they start really speaking at about age 1 and up until school age when they become really fluent in speech. You're developing pathways in your brain to recognize sound and understand and be able to interpret sounds. I think the other thing to understand is kids have small ear canals. They have very tiny ear canals, so the same level of noise for a child is much more irritating, aggravating, damaging than it would be for an adult.
Although the F-35s have been in Vermont for nearly 2 years to the day, people that live in and around the flight path are still pushing to have the jets removed out of Vermont.
Dozens of people in Winooski sounded off Tuesday evening about how the noise from the F-35s negatively impacts their day-to-day life.
They literally make you shake, and my ears just rattle, my inner ears. I can just hear it rattling, even with my hands over them.
When people are exposed to these noise levels, it's not just that you're hearing a loud sound temporarily and then you get over it. There are studies that demonstrate the neurohormonal changes to this type of noise that have long-term effects on learning and aversive behavior, as well as presenteeism, which is the ability to be present at the task at hand. And it causes permanent neuromodulation in kids, meaning as they repeatedly are exposed to a stressor, they can have permanent changes to their nervous system that's going to affect behavior and function down the road. And over time, that's not going to change. So it's not really a question of if the F-35s are causing harm. It's to what extent are the F-35s causing harm?
There are 3 elementary schools within a mile of Truex Field. There are something like 18 schools, that's a lot of elementary schools, about 4 middle schools and 2 high schools that are within the 3-mile radius of the airport. There's also 9 or 10 private and parochial schools that are within that 3-mile radius, and more than 24 daycare centers, including one of the big Head Start centers in the city of Madison. So infants are in daycare centers, and infants don't have the ability yet to cover their ears when they hear a loud sound. There's a school called Richardson School that care for children with autism spectrum disorder, and also some other behavioral and neurodevelopmental issues. It's on the road to the airport. Those kids are much more fragile in how they respond to the environment. Of any kids, are going to be the most affected, I think.
Oh yeah, it's this time.
I mean, Bella being neurodivergent, being on the spectrum, having components of ADHD, anxiety, and dysregulation symptoms, auditory stimulation plays a huge factor in our daily life and in her sensory diet. We've had to find alternatives to set up situations where she can be successful, specifically as it relates to sound. So one of those things is like riding the bus in the morning.
The bus is very loud because all the kids scream and yell, and sometimes they even cuss. And so I think being on the bus is a little bit too noisy.
And even though it's a short period of time, like when she gets to school after riding the school bus, it's really hard for her to get back into regulation. It's distracting and it adds another demand onto the nervous system, and it's something that has to be recovered from. A simple distraction, something that might take you 5 to 10 seconds to come back from, could take a kid like mine who takes extra time to process everything. You know, it could set off the whole day. It could take an hour or two. And so reducing that auditory demand can really help these kids be successful throughout the day in the school system.
The kids that are really going to be the most affected, we think, are kids that have a lot of something called ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. Kids with adverse childhood experiences have higher levels of anxiety and higher levels of depression. The anxiety is partly because when you have these really frightening things happen, or you're anxious about them happening, the fight or flight reflex happens to most all of us. So your adrenaline levels go up, your cortisol levels go up. Those are stress hormones. That happens in kids as well as adults. But the F-35s, it's loud noises. Suddenly, you don't have any warning. For the people that are already at risk for anxiety and depression, it's probably going to lead to a triggering of some of those stress level hormones. There are 800 low-income housing units within like 1,500 feet, I think, of the 65 decibel noise level. 70% of the residents of those housing units are people of color. And those are kids that attend the 3 elementary schools that are within the 1-mile radius.
I am a retired teacher. I taught for 30 years at Hawthorne Elementary School. The school is a very diverse community. Over 70% are minority students. I loved working with them, but it was hard often to get them focused on academic work. It would take a while to get them to settle down. I'd finally get them settled down, and then we'd hear the roar of the F-16s, and I'd have to stop teaching. Just totally stop teaching. It would interrupt everything. And I started thinking about the F-35s, which are even louder. And I thought, this is just terrible because we already have these kids and these families who live at Truex Apartments, which is right nearby. They have to add this to the burdens that they already face. And I thought that's just not fair.
The other big thing people need to think about with schools is kids need to go outside. I'm talking about toddlers as well as school-age kids. Outdoor time gives kids time to learn social skills with other kids. It also builds gross motor and fine motor skills. And you can't keep kids inside. So what do you do with the outside? We can remediate, presumably if we have enough money, all the schools that are affected. You know, $5 million for each school. It's quite a lot of money that the taxpayers in Madison and Dane County are probably going to need to bear to help the public school systems. But we can't do anything about the outdoors. I mean, the only solution we could think of when talking about this is myself and family practice docs and pediatricians, was to put kids in noise-canceling headphones. And how are you going to have 30 kids in the playground who can't hear?
The physical and psychological and emotional impact of having these awful planes like flying around and the impact that it has on young children or children with disabilities. That's what I think, you know, the conversation should be about.
Say it louder, make a scene! We don't want this war machine! Say it louder, make a scene!
If we want in Madison here the 115th Fighter Wing to be an asset to our community, we should find a new mission for the Air National Guard that is appropriate and compatible for our urban area. Rather than continuing the divisive proposal to bring F-35 jets to Truax Field in Madison, let's work to find a new mission for the 115th Fighter Wing that benefits the entire community, one of which we can all be proud.
El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido.